Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim.
Assalamu alaikum guys, welcome back to the channel. This is going to be our first video on a Sahabi and we chose Omar. Muhammad, why did we choose Omar?
We chose Umar Ibn Al-Khattab radiallahu anh because he is very relevant in our lives today, and he is known to be one of the strongest Sahabis to ever live. So why not start the Islam and Fitness YouTube channel with one of the strongest Sahabis to ever exist.
Exactly. Alright, so there's a lot of things about Omar. Omar had like a lot of events throughout his life. You know, he did a lot of battles with Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He went through a lot of trials. He had a lot of, amazing stories. We chose two stories out of his entire life, and after this, hopefully you guys go and do more research about Omar. He has, an amazing lessons that you guys can learn from. So a story that I chose mainly was in Omar's time of Jahiliyyah. He used to drink, right? So one night when he was drinking, he had nothing better to do, so he went to the Kaaba where the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was reciting the Quran. The Prophet was at the Kaaba at night. He was reciting the Quran, and Umar was standing a little far from him. He could still hear what the Prophet was reciting, and this was the first time Umar actually ever heard the Quran. The Quraysh were really resilient to the Quran. They didn't want anything to do with it. They didn't want to read it. They didn't want to listen to it or anything like that, which is kind of similar to a lot of things or a lot of people today. But anyways, so he was listening to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. He was listening to him recite these verses from Surah Al-Haqqa, right? So he was thinking, wow, these verses are really beautiful, or whatever he's saying is really beautiful. These are definitely the words of a poet. So as soon as he thinks that, the Prophet Muhammad gets to the verse in Surah Al-Haqqa which says, this is not the words of a poet, little is it that you believe. And so he's like, wow, how does a prophet know what's in my heart? And so he says, wow, well, they're definitely, if they're not the words of a poet, they're the words of a soothsayer, so kind of like a storyteller. And the next verse after that, after he thinks that, is, nor is it the word of a soothsayer, little is it that you remember, but this is the word sent down by the Lord of the worlds. The significance of this story is really, 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 to me, it's really big, because in a way, like, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was really preparing Umar for Islam, and Umar didn't even know at the time. Umar, he hated Islam. Like, he was Islam's biggest enemy, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was still preparing him. So in our lives, basically, like Umar, we don't know what we're doing right now. A lot of us are young, we're going to college, we're going to a lot of internships, we think we're going to do a certain job, and we're really in uncertain times in our lives. And at the end of the day, we just have to remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is preparing us, whether that's through a trial or even through a blessing, right? You can have a lot of blessings coming in, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is preparing us for something bigger. If we're going through a really hard trial and we're thinking, why are we going through this? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is preparing us for something bigger that we can't even imagine. Just like Umar becoming Muslim, and at that time, no one could even imagine that was going to happen. And later on in Umar's life, it's actually pretty cool. He said that instance was the first time Islam entered his heart. So I think this story really, really, really is really beautiful, and we should all take a lesson from it, and remember that at the end of the day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a bigger plan. We just have to trust that.
Alright, so Umar Ibn Al-Khattab radiallahu anh was one of the strongest Sahabis during his time, and before he accepted Islam, he was actually one of the biggest and harshest enemies towards Islam and the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So just realizing that Umar Ibn Al-Khattab went from one of the biggest enemies to one of the strongest mu'mineen, and one of the strongest Sahabis, is a lesson that we can learn a lot from. In today's world, we have a lot of hate, from the media and from all these different media outlets, pretty much shedding a negative light on Islam, and so in turn, the hate crimes have been increasing and whatnot. So we as Muslims in the Muslim Ummah, we should not take that in a negative way. There's always some positivity in negative things. So when there's a lot of hatred towards Islam, there's also a lot of
Publicity.
There's also a lot of publicity for Islam itself. So you never know, maybe the one guy who made you cry because you're Muslim, he might become a Muslim and might become one of the strongest Muslims in our time, So if somebody shows you hate and shows you negativity because of Islam, don't take that in a negative way. Just let it go and give him da'wah. Give him, just be nice, and your character itself will give da'wah to that individual.
The day Umar became Muslim was actually a very miraculous day because the Quraysh got together and they said, okay, Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he's a huge problem. He's creating a lot of problems in our community. Someone needs to kill him. So Umar, he said, you know what, I'll kill him. And they were like, you're the man to do it. So he's on the way to kill the Prophet, and a passerby sees him, and the passerby was actually Muslim, and he was practicing Islam in secret, and Umar didn't know. So he starts talking to Umar. He's like, where are you going? And Umar is like, well, I'm going to go kill Muhammad. So the passerby, he goes, so he's like thinking, what should I do? And he goes to the last resort. He's like, you know what? You should go check on your family first because they've become Muslim. Your sister and her husband have become Muslim. And he only said this, that Sahaba only said this because it was the last resort, right? So Umar then changed his course and he went to his house, and from there,
so pretty much Umar radiallahu anh arrived at the house at that time, before he was Muslim obviously, and he heard the Quran, and so he entered the house with anger. And so his sister and her husband just kind of hid the sheets where the Quran was written under, they just pretty much hid them. And Umar asked his sister, what were you guys, reciting? What were you guys saying? And they were saying, we were just talking amongst each other. And he knew that they were lying. So he struck her husband, and his sister got in the way, so he struck her too. So after he struck his sister, that's where the point where his sister stood up to him and simply said, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the Lord, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the messenger, and Islam is pretty much the truth. And at that point, Umar saw the courage and the strength of his sister, and at that point he became interested in Islam and what the message was.
So he was like, thinking like, where does she all of a sudden get all this strength from? So he was like, okay, let me see what you were reading. And she said, no, like you're in a state of impurity. And so he went and made wudu, or he went and made ghusl, and then he read the Quran and he fell in love with it. And then he went to the Prophet, and obviously the Sahaba around the Prophet at the time, they're like, so he knocked on the door, and they're like, it's Umar. And so they opened the door, he came in, and the Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he asked me, like, why are you here, Umar? And he said, I've come to become Muslim, and I came to declare that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the only God, and you are his messenger. And upon hearing this, Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, said takbir, everyone else said takbir, and immediately they all dispersed because, at the time they were all practicing Islam in secret. But Umar, the thing that's so special about him is he was such a strong Sahabi, he was so strong-willed that when he became Muslim, he didn't want to hide it, right? So he went and he told one of the people of the Quraysh that I became Muslim, and that the person that he told immediately stood up and started announcing, Umar has become Muslim, Umar has become Muslim, Umar has become Muslim. And at that point, that's when Islam became public. So I think that itself is really significant because a lot of us today, we're scared to show our Islam, right? We go to some place and we're scared to pray. We're scared to tell people we're Muslim. And Umar, in times when people were killing each other in the streets for being Muslim, he went and said, he told this guy, he's like, I became Muslim, you go tell everyone. And that's huge in itself. And I feel like we all need to learn from that and show people that we're Muslim through our manners and be really gentle and compassionate towards people.
Alright, so we hope you guys enjoyed this video. We spoke very briefly about the history of Umar Ibn Al-Khattab radiallahu anh. His history is obviously a lot richer than that, so we encourage you guys to look more deeper into his history, deeper into his life, and really look into his life. It's a very, very interesting and powerful history that he had.
Exactly. And guys, at the end of the day, right, we always make mistakes. We're not perfect. So if you made any mistakes in this video and creating this video, please let us know in the comment section below. If you guys have any ideas, let us know. If you guys have any ideas to make us better, give us constructive criticism, let us know. And we're planning on, inshallah, doing our next video on Khalid ibn Walid. That's one of my personal favorite Sahabas. And hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and make sure to share it with your friends.
See you guys later.
Why did we choose Omar?
What's this?